I don't know, Conrad. I know I've had like food poisoning from Taco Bell like several times, but I'm just saying they just came out with this new vegan nacho cheese fries situation, and I think it's worth the risk. Like I don't know. Do you guys have Taco Bell over there? Like I don't even.
We are not blessed with Taco Bell, I'm sorry to say. We
Oh
have
my God.
Burger King and McDonald's, but no Taco Bell. So, yeah, our Friday nights are
Well,
not full of diarrhea, I'm afraid.
well, you know what's funny about all of this is the only I've had food poisoning 3 times. Twice was from Taco Bell, and the third time was from a place which you probably also don't have called Corn Dog 7, which
Sounds delightful.
is like a food court in the mall kind of a place.
Mm.
And I used to get these seasoned cheese fries, which is exactly what we're talking about, right? But like a vegan version at Taco Bell. So it kind of has all come full circle.
Right.
If I could just get the cheese fries from Taco Bell, then I can either get food poisoning for a fourth time or not get food poisoning and break the curse. Like one or the other is going to happen, but either way, it's going to be really important.
Yeah, cheesy fries are just so unappealing to begin with, and then when you just add the fact that veganism has not managed to achieve reliable cheese yet, it's
Oh my
it's not a great combo.
I do feel like you could achieve a believable vegan Velveeta type cheese. I don't know if you've
Possibly.
ever eaten that. It's not really
No.
cheese, it's a cheese-like product.
Like meat flavored sandwich.
I feel like I can convince you, Conrad.
Okay. Okay. Well, as
Welcome to
soon as
Dreamland, everybody.
yeah, welcome.
Oh, my name is Melinda,
And I'm Conrad.
and today we are talking about our wonderful show title that we came up with, or our guessing title, which is John's.
Mm.
Um, Looks very lascivious. Is that a word?
It's a great word, and I love this image.
I do too. And I love the color scheme. It's very
Mm.
on brand, which is important these days. Um, we, of course, as always, posted our one word clue online with this wonderful image that's filled with all kinds of hints and asked for everyone to make their guesses. And we got several really fun ones. The first being from K Dog Broadcasting. He says, might be a reach, but serial killers from the 80s. Many targeted sex workers, especially Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer. So
Mm.
that does sound like something I would pick.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally go for serial killers of the 80s, but I'm not sure how many people would watch.
I think you'd be surprised.
Okay.
Uh, Second, we got pretty close with Q-Bort, which is a great name. And then he
Yes.
says John Hughes, John Carpenter, famous 80s John directors, which actually is also a really good idea for a topic,
Mm.
right?
It is, yeah.
And Jasmine, our very own Jasmine, who is one of our patrons, I think she may be new, but I'm definitely, this is one of the first times I'm really seeing her name. She says, I'm thinking John Hughes and John Candy, as they did several films together, specifically Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This drawing has both an automobile and a person holding candy. Boy, Jasmine just really knocked it out of the park on that one. Like she got
Yeah.
almost all the clues. The only one she didn't get is that we have different hues of color in the background, right? Like that's the only thing.
That's
But
very
yeah,
subtle though. But I mean the
it really is.
candy,
She
yeah,
did. I mean,
yeah.
well done, Jasmine. Let's all give her a round of applause. That was amazing. I don't think I would have been able to guess that. So,
No, I don't have that kind of brain.
mm-mm. These days, I barely have a brain at all. But of course, our actual topic is Hughes meets Candy. John Hughes and John Candy films. So we're not talking about The Breakfast Club. We're not talking about Pretty in Pink. We're not talking about Long Duck Dong. We're talking about kind of the second chapter in the Hughes oeuvre. How do you say that word?
Oeuvre, yeah.
Oeuvre. Ooh. Anyway,
Yep.
that we're talking
Back to
about
Taco
those
Bell again.
films. Uh, and so, yeah, why remind me like why we chose this as our topic, Conrad?
Well, we're always looking for an episode where we can do a kind of a cultural exchange in a way. In this case, you watching a film that I love that you've never seen, and me watching a film that you love that I have never seen. We're always looking for those. And we just happened upon two John Hughes co productions that fitted the bill. And they're
Uh-huh.
films that are very personally important to both of us. We love them. And neither of the other one had seen them. So, yeah, it was a great opportunity for us to do that and also celebrate a pretty iconic cultural icon of the Gen X period.
Yeah, like and in sort of going through this, it's very Gen X-y, but also like like and I know this term has become like something you shouldn't even say, but like baby boomers meet
Hmm.
Gen X in a way because John Hughes, of course, and John Candy are both boomers. And I don't mean that as like the slur it has become. I mean that as they are baby boomers. And but they're doing films, John Hughes especially, a lot about Gen X culture, like teen culture. And all of those Brat Pack movies from the early part of the 80s are really delving into that Gen X experience, at least for some people. Right.
Yes. For a
But
very strict definition of people.
very specific group of our generation. But anyway, Conrad, you are the one who decided you were going to tackle John Hughes and give us a little background on him. So let's get into it. What do you have to tell me about John Hughes?
So, John Wilden Hughes, I'm not sure if that.
Wilden.
Wilden.
Wilden. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a great middle name. That's the kind of middle
Mhm.
name you want. I thought I'd kick off with his yearbook photo. It seemed appropriate. Uh, he literally began life in the middle of the century and the middle of the United States. He was born in Michigan in 1950 and moved to the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. You wouldn't be surprised by that if you'd seen his movies, when he was barely a teenager. And as we've often discussed during our favourite decades on Dreamland, Hughes' childhood coincided with the emergence of the teenager as a cultural phenomenon in the turbulent 60s. Youth testing the liberations and limitations of adulthood like raptors testing their fences would become a key feature of the popular culture of the time and of Mr. Hughes's films. He quickly developed what would become a lifelong loathing of authority figures while he was in high school. He also
He doesn't
met.
look like a nonconformist, though, does he?
Not really, no. He looks like the kind of guy that would be editing the yearbook, frankly.
In a good way. Like,
In a good
no
way,
offense.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm not one to talk, but one thing he did do was meet his eventual wife at high school. He married his high school sweetheart, Nancy Ludwig, in
Oh,
1970 when they were at the ripe old age of 20.
wow,
And yeah, there's John with Nancy.
Nancy.
He began his professional career in the advertising industry. We might see a hint of what he thought about that in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Didn't
Yeah,
enjoy it a great deal.
I feel like so I sort of did a little bit of research on him as well. And his parents were very corporate, very like wanting him to be a corporate guy who had a corporate business day job. Like not an artist in any way shape or form.
Yeah.
And I think he resented that and I think that kind of again is that nonconformist edge that he has. But I think he did that till he was like 30, right?
Yeah, he was a pretty late bloomer. So it was, In 1979, when he was 29, he became the editor of National Lampoon magazine. And I just love that middle image.
Yeah, the image on the left with the rocket going into the suburban house really kind of does remind me a little bit of Weird Science, isn't it? In
Mm,
Weird Science, where the missile comes up from the floor, which
yeah,
also kind of feels like a big phallic symbol. But anyway,
yeah. No, I just love the image of the dog with a gun to its head saying, if you don't buy this magazine, we'll kill this dog.
well, I feel like I need to do some research, but National Lampoon, like I used to get Mad magazine, or my dad did, and so I
Mm.
would see Mad sort of instead of National Lampoon, and I feel like they were competing properties.
Yeah, I didn't even realize they had a magazine. I didn't know, from my perspective, National Lampoon is just a series of movies. That's all I
Right.
know them as. So this all came as a shock to me doing the research to this. So John began his screenwriting career. He went from the
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I have to go back to the dog magazine where it
yeah.
says above, it's at the very top, it says death. And then one of the things it says last aid kit, suicide letters to Santa. Good Lord. Okay. I'm a fan. All right.
It's
Keep going.
great.
I'm sorry.
It's great writing. Now, he essayed his great writing career into TV to begin with in episodes of National Lampoon's series Delta House, which was a short lived attempt to turn the hit movie Animal House into a primetime TV show on ABC, but obviously stripped of all of the raunchy humour
Of
that
course.
clearly couldn't appear on primetime television. So, oddly enough, that seemed to rob it of all of its fine qualities. There
Yeah.
wasn't much left. So the show was a pale imitation and was cancelled after one season, but it did launch the career of one Michelle Pfeiffer, who appeared as quote unquote the bombshell, which
She's just so pretty.
she is incredibly beautiful.
I mean, she's just stunning.
Yeah, and
It's
still
it,
is.
she is, but like, can you imagine seeing her in real life, like walking down the street? Like, you would just holy crap. Like, anyway,
Just
sorry.
dissolve. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I would just start sweating. Pretty much anything that upsets me just makes me start sweating. So,
Okay. Taco Bell again. Okay. His first film
yes.
script his first film script was for Class Reunion in 1982, which lacked the panache he would bring to later works. It was really the double whammy of Mr. Mom, Michael Keaton
Hmm.
feature, and
Hmm.
National Lampoon's Vacation, of course, in 1983, that scored him his first big box office hits. And he seems to have then fallen into directing merely to exert more creative control over the scripts that he was writing. And luckily, Universal Pictures was confident enough in his previous two scripts to let him direct 16 Candles, which followed in 1984. And thus
Uh-huh.
began his sequence of much loved teenage romantic dramas and comedies that I think have come to define his legacy. I think if people think John Hughes, they
Yes,
think The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Some Kind of Wonderful.
for sure.
I think that's pretty defining in terms of his career. Although it wasn't
Definitely.
his biggest success, we'll get to that later. So, as was typical of 80s high concept filmmaking, his stories could be summarized in a single sentence, but his trick was to focus on the seemingly mundane everyday concerns of teenagers, but take them seriously. So, something as simple as finding a date for the prom was given the sort of weight that you experience it as a teenager, and thus teenagers watching it could relate to it and think, wow, finally somebody gets us. So,
Yeah, however I may feel about some of these movies, which we can talk about a little later,
mhm.
if you listen to John Hughes talk about how how he feels about teenagers. I just loved him, like just hearing him say those words, because he talked about how so many people do not really put any importance on what it's like to be a teenager or any of the angst or problems that you're going through. They just tend to diminish that as an adult. And he definitely doesn't agree with that. And he thinks they're not, he didn't even like the term teenager. He just saw them as people, and so he tried to treat them as just people who have feelings and who have struggles and who are going through things, which is true. Like, it's definitely true. So, um, I don't know. I do really respect him for that.
Yeah. I think he's probably the great auteur of the teenage drama
Yeah.
romantic comedy. In retrospect, however, his films do have their flaws.
You don't say.
Yeah, just slightly. Um, so
In
there
what
are
way,
under
Conrad?
so apparently, if you look really, really closely, they do
Uh-huh.
reflect some of the underlying cultural values of their time, which was sexist and a little bit racist, and it's a bit
Just a little bit of
rapey,
racism. A little
little,
rapey.
little
Yeah.
bit of rape. Yeah. Molly
It was the
Ringwald,
80s.
it was the 80s. What are you going to do? In retrospect, Molly Ringwald has reflected back on this because she appeared in many of the seminal teenage dramas of the 80s, and she charitably referred to the flaws as blind spots that John Hughes had, which I think is
Yeah,
kind of her.
I don't know if I don't know. I think John Hughes, he sort of grew up in a certain social class and, you know, wealth level and stuff like that. And so a lot of his movies sort of are limited to that sort of experience. And so I think from standing there, all those things are just gonna be part of it.
Yeah, I
I'm not
think
making an
so.
excuse. I'm just saying that's just what it was like for
Yeah,
that group
that
of people.
yeah, exactly. It's holding up a mirror to the time, and it's fascinating as a time capsule of that period as well. It's very accurate, I think.
Hmm.
Just as the advent of the multiplex cinema, usually as part of a shopping mall, drove the development of teen focused films in the early 80s, which was mostly comedies or slasher movies, so the Friday the 13th and so on. The recession towards the end of the decade and the beginning of the 90s encouraged movie theatres to attempt to lure in more affluent family audiences to bolster their income. And as one writer put it, to quote, replace the unruliness of teenagers with a brand of bourgeois civility.
Ooh, that's putting a nice. Oh, yikes.
Yes, the shopping mall multiplex. Do you have fond memories of those?
Well, so we didn't in the towns that I ever lived in, we didn't have this. Like this is probably a bigger city type of phenomenon. So depending on where you lived, you may or may not have this, but like yeah, I know that there were like malls that had movie theaters in them, but I don't think I ever went to one. We always just had like the strip mall, like
Right,
where you have like the outside entrance to the movie theater. But
right.
yeah, I mean, I can certainly envision this. It looks like a modern movie theater here, like with all that crap everywhere.
Yeah, it's very plastic and neon and exciting, isn't it?
And soulless.
Yeah. So this looks very familiar to me as like a
Oh,
teenager in the 90s.
okay.
So I remember going to a place called The Point in Bracknell. Lovely
Mm.
place. And it had the typical British combo of bowling, cinema, arcade. And as a
Wow, that
teenager,
sounds
that was sort of,
great.
that was Mecca for kids my
Conrad, do you know
age.
what we had?
No.
We had we had the Walmart parking lot.
Wow.
That's where we hung out because we
That
didn't
sounds
have any
great.
of that stuff. I think we had a seedy bowling alley and we had a seedy movie theater. None of that was connected, and they didn't like teenagers to be there. I think there were a couple of arcades in the bowling alley, but We just all hung out in the parking lot until the cops ran us off, and then we went to the Burger King parking lot, and then we would go back to the Walmart parking lot. Like, yeah, that was it.
Sounds very gritty and real, though.
It wouldn't be in a John Hughes movie, let's put it that way.
I can't see Molly Ringwald hanging around in a Walgreen market.
Getting Taco Bell.
Yeah. Marvelous. So the shopping malls were aiming for a different clientele towards the recession-ridden late 80s. In addition, by 1991, more than three-quarters of American households with a TV set also had a VCR. So families were spending more on renting and buying sell-through videos for their kids than going to the cinema, which, let's face it, when you're taking kids and buying concessions, going to the cinema is expensive. So
You don't
it
say.
was, yeah, you needed to really lure families in. So you
Hmm.
had to come up with movies that had broader appeal. So yeah, that's just a little
Ooh.
chart I came up with to show the drop in movie tickets sold around about this period as people were buying those sweet VCRs.
Oh yeah, because I mean, it's comparable, right? Watching a movie at home on your tiny 4:3 TV with a
Yeah.
VCR is identical to seeing it in a movie theater.
Mm,
It's cheaper, I
yeah.
grant you.
It's cheaper, yeah. That's sweet VHS quality. Honestly, I
Hmm.
don't know how we survived with it, frankly. When you look back at it, it's hideous. But there we go.
Oh, it was so great back then, though.
It's all we had.
It
Tracking
certainly
lines.
was. It was definitely all we had.
So
Anyway.
anyway, chasing this trend and trying to open out his movies to a wider audience than just teenagers, Hughes dabbled, and there was this interesting sort of in between period where he obviously hadn't quite figured out what he wanted to do. When he made a couple of movies that really only featured adults. So, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, one of the movies we'll be talking about today, 1987, and She's Having a Baby, which came out in 88. It wasn't actually finished in 88, but I'll get onto that later. Uh, Hughes responded with comedies that intentionally held appeal for children and parents alike after that, which led to The Great Outdoors and Uncle Buck. And then he hit the gold mine with Home Alone in 1990, which is easily, by a factor of 10, in some cases by a factor of 100, his most commercially successful film. In fact, it's the highest grossing movie of its year and the 17th of the entire 1990s. So, yeah, he didn't have to work again after Home Alone, I shouldn't think.
Yeah, I wouldn't think a lot of those people had to work again,
No.
except for John Candy, which we'll talk about that as well a little later.
Yes. Well, speaking of Mr. Candy, Hughes was also a master of integrating famous comedians' personas into a coherent narrative in his comedies, which was one of the things that he was a trailblazer in. Previous movies featuring comedians like the Marx Brothers and Bob Hope and Jerry Lewis tended to grind the story to a halt to give the stars an opportunity to do their thing. Whereas Hughes found a way to contain the comedians within the narrative, to domesticate them in a way. And one comedian was in more John Hughes movies than any other actor. And who was that, Melinda?
And that, of course, was our friend John Candy, um, who
Oh,
he doesn't have the wilder wildness, whatever that guy's middle name was. Um, Also born in 1950, but on
oh,
Halloween. So,
wow.
yeah, in Toronto, Canada. He grew up in Ontario with his older brother. You can see on the left his brother holding a cat, and our friend John Candy there with a cat later. He apparently loves cats, which I, of course, respect. He loves animals. He's a big animal lover. His he was raised basically just by his mom and his extended family because his dad died of a heart attack when John Candy was only 5. So he died very young, which was sort of prophetic in a sad way. So he did some children's TV in the 70s, including something called Dr. Zonk and the Zunkins, and a show called Cucumber, which apparently stands for Children's Underground Club of United Moose and Beaver for Enthusiastic Reporters.
Of course. It
It's
trips off
so
the tongue.
it just rolls right off the tongue. It's so Canadian that, you know, I don't know what to say about that, but it's pretty funny. Like you'll see him, he's in the Spider-Man slash Superman-esque outfit there in the center of that photo. You could barely tell that's him, but that's him.
Yeah. Wow.
In 1973, at just 19 years old, he joined the resident ensemble of the Second City in Toronto, and in 76 he joined the cast of Second City's TV show SCTV, where he worked with people like Eugene Levy, Bill Murray, and Catherine O'Hara. Catherine O'Hara, of course, being a friend that lasted throughout most of his life. And this image on the right in my original deck is actually like a GIF where he's taking the cat and like moving the cat towards the camera and saying, "Look how far we'll go to do 3D television." And the cat's just like, "Put me down, dude." It's pretty great. So as time progresses, we get to the 80s. So from 1980 to 1983, he starts being a character actor in a bunch of fairly well-known films, even if they weren't huge box office successes. So things like The Blues Brothers in 1980, Stripes in 81. He was a voice, believe it or not, in the movie Heavy Metal of like this big muscle-bound dude. In the movie Heavy Metal, which was animated, and then, and of course, National Lampoon's Vacation in 1983. He's a lot of these are just small little parts, but of course, he brings his John Candy magic in, and he's making a lot of really great connections as well. And I do know that like one of the things that is discussed about him is that there was a slump in Saturday Night Live, like which happened around the time that like Gilda Radner and like Dan, like all those people that were sort of like late 70s were leaving the show, and the show kind of went into like one of its slump periods, and they wanted John Candy to come on the show, and he was like, "Nah, I'm good," which was probably a really good decision because the show kind of didn't pick back up until quite a bit later towards the end of the 80s. But yeah, so continuing on, we get to 1984 with Splash, and he has a slightly bigger role in that movie, and it was a pretty successful film. You know, Tom Hanks, of course, and Daryl Hannah. He in the next year, in 1985, he was in Brewster's Millions and Summer Rental. I've never seen Summer Rental. It looks pretty low budget, but I've definitely seen Brewster's Millions. I remember it as being pretty funny. But you know, it's very 80s, so I don't know how well it holds up. Have you seen it?
I do remember it. I saw Summer Rental as well, and I was really disappointed because I was expecting something that was as good as Splash and Brewster's Millions, and yeah, it really wasn't. But yeah, Brewster's Millions. I mean, it is so 80s though, because it's purely concerned with amassing wealth.
Of course it is.
That's the
Yeah.
80s dream, isn't it?
It really is. Really is. Then we move on to like 86, where he did Little Shop of Horrors, which was one of my favorites as a kid. I love that movie, even despite Steve Martin, which you'll find that I just have this thing where I don't love Steve Martin. I can't quite figure out why, because like I like him in Father of the Bride, but like when I think of him, I think of The Three Amigos.
Oh,
And
okay.
I kind of think that's why. I think that movie is the reason that I don't like him, because I feel like I like him in about half of the movies he does, honestly. So, but anyway, that's a separate issue. So, and then of course Spaceballs, which I hate, but I know a lot of people love it. I'm sure a lot of the people watching and listening really love Spaceballs from 1987. I just don't really like spoofs. I didn't like any of the National Lampoon movies either. They were a little just too over the top, slapsticky, spoofy, like on the nose dad joke kind of stuff for me personally. But what do you think, Conrad? You're making a face. So I need you to tell me what you're thinking.
With Spaceballs, Dan and I talked about this very recently on Movie Oubliette. Neither of us particularly like Spaceballs. It feels very much like old man who doesn't understand Star Wars making lame jokes about it. But I do love the recreation of the alien chestburster scene where the alien dances along the bar with a top hat and sings "Hello, my baby." That's
Yeah,
just my favorite part of that movie because it's completely bizarre.
sure. Yeah, I kind of feel like, Mel Brooks is just sort of, you either love him or hate him. And
Yeah,
that's a Mel Brooks movie, right? Like it's anyway.
yeah.
So, a couple of interesting little side notes that I came across in doing my research that I'm excited to talk about. So, the first one is that there was potentially going to be a John Candy Sylvester Stallone movie
What?
called, yeah, called by which was written, produced, and directed by John Hughes, and it was called Bartholomew versus Neff. Now, so this was during that weird time period towards the end of the 80s, like right around the time we're talking about, like 89, 90, where Stallone wanted to kind of get away from like all the action stuff and do some different types of things. It's the time period where he did stuff like Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, like some of his less great stuff, right?
Yeah,
But
okay.
this was sort of a script that, it was a film that Hughes had written with a view to direct it in the summer of 90. And then um, the it just Karolko, which you can kind of see over there, at that point they were bankrolling Terminator 2, and they actually got the rights, but then it just never ended up coming to pass. So I don't know if
Oh,
that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a thing. And then the
mm.
other thing that's kind of weird is, I don't know, have you ever heard of the incomparable Atuk?
No, not at
Okay,
all.
well, let me tell you a fun story. So, The Incomparable Atuk is a book that was written, it's a satirical novel that was written by a Canadian author called Mordecai Rickler. And it satirizes 60s Canadian cultural elites. And basically, it's about this Inuit in the book. Of course, they're called Eskimo, which I know is not a term we use anymore. But this, it's based, I think, on there's a documentary film about like Nanook of the North is what it's called, and it's kind of about this noble savage. It's like early documentary film that's got like the voice of God in it, and it's showing like how those people lived off the land. And so this sort of like overweight Inuit guy, who of course was going to be played by, initially it was written for John Belushi was who they
Uh,
visualized for it. He was going to leave his tribe or whatever and come into the city, and everyone was like, oh, he's this noble savage, but then they find out he's terrible, and then they kind of spin it and use it to make fun of him. But anyway, the point is that this film adaptation was in the work from like the mid 80s to the beginning of the 90s, but it never got made. And it was going to be just called Atuk. And there's this whole theory that the film and the script is cursed because
oh,
John Belushi was in the process of like getting ready to make the movie when he died. And then the next person that was chosen to play that role was Sam Kinison, and he was working on it, and then he died. And then it went to John Candy in 94, and he was literally reading the script like in the weeks leading up to his death in 94. Then it got passed to Chris Farley, who then also copied Phil Hartman in on the script, and they both died. So it was like this thing that's so freaking weird. And so many of these kind of, leaving Sam Kinison and Phil Hartman out a little bit, the guys on the top kind of tend to play a lot of the same types of characters in some ways in movies. Like they're like the chubby, funny guy with a heart of gold, kind of character, which is a
mm.
trope that we see exemplified sort of in Planes, Trains, definitely in Uncle Buck, and then continuing on into the 90s for sure. But anyway, yeah, that's a weird little thing.
So don't download that script.
Don't read it, everybody. Just
No,
don't do it.
no.
As you mentioned, he John Candy did appear in more movies written or directed by John Hughes than any other actor. There are 8 of them, and some of these he's just really got like a bit part. It's not like he's got a starring role, but he does appear in all these movies in some form or
Wow.
fashion. And then just one little side note that I mentioned earlier, which is about Home Alone. According to the Netflix show The Movies That Made Us, he apparently only received $414 for being in Home Alone, because he had made a deal with John Hughes. Because Hughes had apparently offered him a slice of the profits, but Candy was just like, "Nah, I'll just take scale. You know, it's not a big deal. You're my friend." And then, of course, the movie blows up, and it's this insane hit. And so then I think John Candy was like, "Ooh, I probably screwed up and should
Yeah.
have not done that, right?" But anyway, so the only other little trivia tidbit that I wanted to share with you is that John Candy, going back to our last episode, performed with Northern Lights to sing "Tears Are Not Enough" for the Ethiopian famine. So,
Ah, there you
uh,
go.
yeah, it all just ties together. It ties together.
All of those connections.
Yep.
Well, let's zoom in on one of those movies now, and we'll do it chronologically. So, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which was released the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, November 25th, 1987. And it features a nitpicky, high strung advertising executive, Neil Page, played by Steve Martin, who becomes unlikely travel buddies with the sweet but somewhat irritating shower curtain ring salesman, Del Griffith, played by John Candy, when their flight is diverted in bad weather. What follows is a road and rail movie full of hijinks as the pair desperately try to get to Chicago in time for Neil's Thanksgiving break with his family. Now, in terms of what this movie means to me, this is a huge family favorite. We'd always been fans of uh, John Candy and Steve Martin separately. To see them together on a road movie, I'm a sucker for a road movie. There's something about the whole the journey and the liminal space where
I learned
exciting
that
yet
when
weird
you
things
actually
can
liked
happen.
Over the Top, Conrad.
Yes, yes, that's a good point. I was totally suckered in by Over the Top. Yeah, I love a road movie. And
Okay.
this is kind of, for me, for my money, this is the best road movie. I mean, it's
Okay.
weird. I tend to think of it as a Christmas movie. So my family watches it around Christmas because we don't know what
I
Thanksgiving
was
is
wondering
because we're
about
done.
that.
Yeah,
I was
it's
like,
snowy.
"How are you watching it, like, at Thanksgiving? You guys don't even celebrate that." Like, so,
No,
okay,
we
good
watch
to
it at
know.
Christmas. It's snowy. It's close enough, so that's fine for us. And in particular, it's a family favorite of my father's. Uh, Specifically, the scene where Steve Martin goes to the rental clerk, the car desk. I think it's a very famous scene. And all of his frustrations just suddenly pour out at this poor lady who's working behind the desk. And he quite memorably says the F word 19 times in 60 seconds during his tirade at this poor lady. But Edie McClurg, fantastic comedic actress, her final response, bringing the total of F words to 20, a neat 20, is by far the best. And she
Mhm.
claims that people still come up to her and ask her to say that to them, to their face in public, because they
Yeah,
love it so much. And it
sure.
was one of the scenes that when he was reading the script that convinced Steve Martin to be in the movie. But my
Oh,
dad, whenever he watches this, he always leans forward in his chair and he's mouthing the dialogue because it's some
wow.
sort of fantasy moment for him that he could do this at some point in his life to some poor service person. um there's just something about it that he loves. But yeah, I think it's a big hearted movie. I think it's very funny. It does have some problematic elements, but yeah, it's a family favorite. So we watch it every year. So I'm really interested to see what you thought of
I'm scared to show you my reaction to this movie, Conrad.
it.
Like, I Look, I was having a bad day when I watched it too, so I just want you to like keep that in mind. But I also have to say, like, I really I'd heard of this movie, obviously, but for
Mhm.
some reason, and I don't know what that reason is, I always in my brain transposed it with Throw Mama from the Train. I think it's because of the word
Oh.
train.
Oh, okay.
And so which I've also never seen, but it looked terrible. It looked like something I would hate. And I don't do great with slapstick.
Mhm.
Even like the Brat Pack John Hughes movies tended to be a little bit more like physical comedy related, and so I struggled with those parts. So anyway, are you ready to see my my
I am.
reaction, Conrad?
I cannot wait to see your
Oh
reaction.
God. Okay. All right, everybody. Here was my reaction to this lovely film. All right, it's time for me to watch. What is this called? All right, it's time
Good
for me to
start.
watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'm going to have to push past my hatred of Steve Martin and just focus on the candy. That's how I get through a lot of movies. Oh my God, Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I know this
Prime
is your
Kevin
cab, but
Bacon.
I'm desperately late for a plane, and I was wondering if I could appeal to your good nature and ask you to let me have it. Come on! Could I offer you $10 for it?
Look at all those cabs. Look at them all.
Do you think Grandpa Walt is gonna give me a noogie?
Of course he's gonna give you a noogie. He loves to give you noogies. That's how he tells you that he loves you.
Why doesn't he give me noogies?
Because you get Indian burns.
Wow.
I sell shower curtain rings. Best in the world. And you are?
Glad I don't sell shower curtain rings.
Okay. My dogs are barking today. Whew. Oh. That feels better. You want to take a shower?
No.
No, I mean, if you want to go first or not. Oh, you thought I...
No, go ahead.
Oh, I would... What do you think I am?
No.
An expression like you're the boss.
How did he get in the shower without knowing that was the situation?
Never thought about that.
Oh my God, no! Oh my God! Sweet Jesus.
If I don't clear my sinuses, I'll snore all night.
I'd rather you snore.
Honey, I'd like you to meet Del Griffith. He's got some amusing anecdotes for you. Oh, and here's a gun so you can blow your brains out. You'll thank me for it.
I've had house guests like this. Well, maybe not like this. If he was really that empathetic and compassionate, would he have really used all the towels? I mean, that's just gauche. What does that mean?
You shower curtain fella?
Yeah, Del Griffith. How are you? This is Neil Page from
Oh
Chicago.
my
Hi.
sweet Jesus. What is up with this movie and phlegm?
Witch dog from Flintstones and the Marconi family. From the town of Bedrock, they're a page
I didn't see one person singing, and yet
with the Flintstones.
I want a car right now.
you're not gonna get a good reaction with that.
What is your problem? You insensitive asshole. Can't you see we got an injured man down on the street? But I want you to help him up.
No.
Do you have any idea how glad I am I didn't kill you?
Do you have any idea how glad I'd be if you had?
You know,
Oh, come on, pal. You don't mean that.
I've kicked a guy in the nuts pretty hard, and he never talked like
How am I
that.
supposed to go with
Just
the
saying.
flow with them?
Putting my wallet in the glove compartment. Don't let me forget it.
All right.
Why are you doing that?
Whoa.
I'm so irritated right now. I'm sweating. This moment is a little too far for me. Just letting you know. Why is there a picture of Jeff Goldblum playing a ukulele on the wall? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd enjoy seeing that in a motel room. Can you imagine auditioning as this actress for like the role of this wife? You're just occasionally sitting around, like just doing things. You don't have to necessarily say anything. Is that a one-eyed cow?
When am I ever gonna wake up?
It's not waking up you need to do, it's growing up. Understanding the impact of your actions on others. He has no money or anything. Like, you're just gonna leave him there? Like,
Oh no, you didn't cause me any trouble. You got me home.
I mean, he's annoying,
A
but
little late.
that's...
Couple days.
It's Thanksgiving.
But,
Like, don't just...
I'm a little wiser.
You're just gonna leave him there. He doesn't have anybody there. What are you doing? Is it the Home Alone house? Because it kind of looks like it.
Yes.
Why is she crying?
The streets away.
Oh wow, freeze frame. Oh wow, okay.
So a mixed reaction.
Don't hate me!
No, it's fine. It seemed like you enjoyed some parts of it.
I did. I did. Just not the phlegmy parts.
No.
What is up with that? Like, I guess it's something that maybe John Hughes finds to be really funny.
Yeah, I
Like
think
fart
it's his
jokes.
way of delineating the working class from the middle class is phlegm. It seems to involve a lot of phlegm. And the guy
Yeah.
with the baseball cap, that whole thing with him spitting tobacco and wiping it on his hand, that was a complete improvisation. So Steve Martin's reaction to that is purely real.
Yeah, well, it's funny because Steve Martin is sort of discussed as being this uptight, fastidious guy, and I'm like, I feel like for the most part, he's pretty relatable. Like, I'm kind of on his side with a lot of this stuff, and I mean, like, I feel sorry for, like, Dell. I feel like I don't want to be mean to him. I feel like in that scene where which I did find very funny, by the way, where he goes off on Dell, like Steve Martin just screaming at him and telling him how much he sucks. I was like, yeah, but at the same time, like you're being really you're punching down, dude. Like clearly this guy's got a lot of issues that you don't have in your life. So maybe, if you've decided to go in and travel with the guy, just be kind to him and just tolerate.
Yeah. No,
Explain it to me, Conrad.
No, he's not very tolerant. It's pretty much it epitomizes John Hughes's overall mindset in his movies, which is not surprisingly quite conservative. I think he was a big supporter of Reagan, for example. So his normalization of that particular type of house in that particular type of neighborhood and the family unit and the upper middle class trappings as being, this is what we should be aiming for, and this is good and unimpeachable, and this other guy is other, and so the goal is to try and smooth off the rough edges of him and sort of domesticate him, but at the same time also get the uptight exec corporate guy just to be a bit more empathetic and live a little. So John Candy tends to epitomize this, or rather represent somebody who's a little bit more real, a bit more down to earth than the Neil Page characters. There's sort of a happy medium there that he's sort of aiming for, but a lot of that is depicted in ways that focus too much on John Candy's body, that his body is in some way symbolic of his excess and carelessness, whereas Neil Page's body is, Steve Martin's body, sort of classically, this is what we should be aiming for, and being fastidious and looking after yourself. So those are the sort of dynamics at play, which, it makes for a fun, odd couple comedy, but
Sure.
making people sympathize with them was a huge problem, actually. So the film was edited by Paul Hirsch, who edited a lot of, well, he edited Star Wars, but he also edited a lot of Brian De Palma movies. And he's a very, very famous and accomplished editor. And he worked with John Hughes a couple of times. He worked on Ferris Bueller. And he said that he was shocked at just how much footage John Hughes was shooting. Like, for example, 4 hours just of the cab ride scene. They watched dailies for 4 hours just for that one scene. So he ended up with 3 assistant editors helping him cut the movie to meet the sort of Thanksgiving release date. And they tested the film 9 times to try and figure out what the best version of it was. And they had 2 key problems. One was they removed every element of a subplot that was all about who was paying what and with which credit card. Because they thought it's overly complicated. It doesn't pay off. Let's just strip
It's still
it
a
all
little
out.
bit in there. Like there's a little bit of it in there. And
Yeah,
I
they had to put
cut
it
out my
back.
reaction to that because like I kept saying, I think a lot of my problems that I had, aside from the phlegm and the bodily
Yeah.
function stuff, okay, and the really hardcore slapstick, the rest of the movie feels pretty good. Having sort of watched a little bit of behind the scenes to understand this and the stuff that was taken out of in the edit, I think a lot of my issues would have been solved by the longer cut, which, John Hughes, I'm sure you're going to say this, but he's notorious for like letting people improv and filming very long cuts for the first cut, which was, I think was like 3 hours long for this movie, and
Yeah,
then trimming it all.
3:45.
Yeah, so trimming all of that out, which I understand the movie didn't need to be that long, but I think there are like remnants of things that once I saw it made so much more sense. Like the kid that breaks into their room in the first hotel room that steals the money out of the wallet, out of Steve Martin's wallet, the cash, was actually a whole subplot that got cut out where he was the pizza kid and he was delivering the pizza, and of course John Candy didn't have any money, so he didn't give him much of a tip. He gave him like $1, and so that's why he comes back and steals the money. So that was like more motivated, because in the movie as it stands,
Right.
you're just like, well, why is that happening? And there was a whole scene where John Candy came in while Steve Martin was in the shower and did that to the bathroom. So we got to see that he actually did it. And Steve Martin kind of knew he was in there. He was like, hey, I'm in here. What are you doing? And he's like, I'm just getting ready for bed, And I think that would have been funny to leave it in. I don't know why they decided to take it out.
Well, they had to cut it to get it down to like comedy movie length, 90 minutes.
Yeah,
I guess
I
this
get
is
it.
where they are. But yeah, they went back and forth. I mean, particularly all the stuff about the money. When they took all of it out, they were testing the movie and people were getting up and walking out like a quarter of the way through, third of the way through. And when they questioned them about it, it's because they hated Dell. They thought he was a mooch. They thought he was a parasite taking advantage of Neil, and they hated Neil for letting him do it to him. So they had to put some of the money arrangement stuff back in. So you had that key conversation where Dell says, I feel really bad. I'm not paying for anything. And Steve Martin's character says, it's fine. As long as you get me home, we're square. It's fine. So they needed to put some of that material back in. Also, the other big issue they had to solve was the ending. So the original ending has Neil arrive at his station and trip over Dell's trunk again and find Dell there waiting for him and coming clean about being homeless and being a widower and begging Neil to take pity on him. He's on his knees at one point begging him. There's this big long speech. Audiences hated it, just hated it. So they had to try and come up with a new version just from the edit. And Paul Hirsch manufactured an ending using some of the coverage from the train journey, because apparently they had various takes of Steve Martin obviously just lost in thought, thinking about things and laughing to himself, and then looking puzzled, and then suddenly looking urgent as if he's realized something. And he might not have even been aware the camera was on. And they used that to create all the flashbacks of him suddenly thinking back on all these things that Dell said that make him realize, I don't think this guy's got anywhere to go. And him going back to the other train station is them just reversing the footage of his train leaving. They've got it.
Wow.
They've just reversed the footage to get him to go back. And manufacture it to look as though he's become more of an empathetic person. He's thinking about Dell as a real human being who has issues. And Dell just says that one thing about the fact that his wife is no longer around. And without any further conversation, Neil just saying, come home, come with me.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that is a much better ending for both of those characters, rather than Dell being this creepy guy that's still stalking him and begging him. And so they finally landed on an ending that they thought worked best. I still hate it. And I hate it for one reason. My mother thinks the same. We both think it's just really cruel to take this poor lower middle class guy or working class guy back to your massive house and your beautiful wife and family. Because, I mean, he's not taking him to live there. It's just like, you're going to have Thanksgiving dinner and then you're out. I don't know. It just seems like torture. It seems cruel. But
well, I
what
mean,
else
what's
are
he
you
gonna
do?
do? Like, other than that, like, I don't know what the alternative would be for like an ending of a movie. But
No, it's hard. I think it's okay, but it still seems a bit, I don't know. It
I
seems
feel
a bit
like,
cruel.
yeah, it would be nice if he had some sort of little glimmer of hope, for something getting better within his own life a little bit. But I just don't think that's the kind of movie that it is. Like,
No.
you were talking about your favorite, this being your favorite road trip movie, and I'm going to point to another, sort of unsung John Hughes related film that is also a road trip movie that you've probably never seen, and it's called Dutch. And
Mm,
it's got Ed O'Neill, who's, I think that's his name, who is like Married with Children guy,
yeah.
um, and a little kid. So it's kind of like Over the Top meets Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Oh, I'm sold.
And it's a Thanksgiving movie
Ah,
also, and or Christmas. I think it's Thanksgiving, and they're going home. Pretty sure he's his new stepdad, and the kid is a jackass. Like, he is the worst. But it is very funny. There's some slapsticky stuff in there. You can feel the John Hughesiness of it. This movie, I think, inspired that. It's sort of a nice stepping stone to get to Home Alone, because it's like that some kid stuff in there. But yeah, it has that more, like, the kid actually gets to a point where he has like an epiphany and he stops being a jerk, right? Like, and that's not a spoiler. He would have to, because he is contemptible at the beginning. So,
right.
in this movie, like, I don't know if I feel arcs. I feel like John Hughes is sort of known for saying he likes to focus just on characters, not necessarily character development, but character sketches. He doesn't necessarily try to take a character and change them tremendously from the beginning and give them an arc always. It's more just like a slice of life situation in some of his movies. Like The Breakfast Club feels that way, because nothing changes at the end of The Breakfast Club. All the people are pretty much still the same. Nothing, like, they pretty much say, I'm still not ever going to hang out with you in public because it'll ruin my rep, you know?
Yeah, which I think is
Or you have to
probably,
dress up differently in order for me to be seen in public with you. Like,
yeah, which is what happens to Ali Sheedy, which I think neither of us likes as
I
an ending.
it infuriates me. It fills
Yeah.
me with rage. I really she's the only character I liked. And then the only way to make her palatable or acceptable is to change her into a preppy, you know what. So,
Yeah. I think we might have stumbled upon something here that is a weakness in John Hughes's work, is that he, in needing a 3-act structure and an ending, I think he struggled with endings, because
mm,
sometimes you need to suddenly show that kind of resolution or that kind of character development. And in both the movies we looked at, the ending was a problem specifically because you had to show that growth, and there hadn't actually been any during the course of the film. So all of a sudden, something just changes in them and they're different people for one scene, and then you freeze frame and roll credits and you think, hang on,
Is
how?
that earned?
Yeah.
Which
So,
we'll
and
probably be talking about a little bit in a few minutes.
I think we might. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's Planes, Trains.
I will say this. It is not something that I probably would have sought out. I don't think it's something I would watch. Like, I wouldn't go, hey, I really want to watch that movie again. And that's mostly due to the phlegm stuff. Honestly, it just really grosses me out. But John Candy, I do have a big soft spot for John Candy. So even in movies that I really don't like, when he appears on the screen, I'm like, oh. And I really do think that that's because of my absolute love for Uncle Buck, which I know we're about to talk about. So,
Yes. Well, I'm glad you got to see it, and I'm glad you got some enjoyment out of it. So
I definitely did. And I watched a couple of the outtakes, and another outtake from that same scene that I laughed at during the thing where he's eating, they order pizza, like I mentioned, and Steve Martin opens this disgusting pizza, and he opens it, and I don't even remember what the quote is, but whatever he says when he looks at it, because it looks like really gross. I laughed out loud so hard earlier today when I was watching that outtake. So those outtakes that came out with the 4K, was that last year that came out?
it was, yeah, I bought it for my dad for Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. If you like this movie and you haven't seen that, I would say that seems like a great thing to get. It's certainly worth it. There's a ton of extra footage there to see.
There is.
And it's funny.
Yeah.
It's really funny. Like, I almost enjoyed the outtakes more than the movie.
Interesting. So maybe
Yeah.
you would like the 3-hour cut.
I think so.
Yeah.
Cut out the phlegm. Like, I want to re-edit the whole thing.
There is a small moment in the motel scene that always sticks with me. You know, somehow in movies, there'll just be this small moment that's not really a big show-stopping moment. It's just a little thing. And it's when they're drinking those miniature bottles of alcohol and they've got snacks everywhere, and Neil Page is finally just relaxing and being and sharing space with this guy on the same level with no pretense. And John Candy's trying to go to the bathroom, and Steve Martin just giggles and says, "Why do I feel like I'm at summer camp?" And I always remember as an audience member, right from the first time I watched it, I thought, yeah, I get that. I don't know why, but I completely get it, that you would feel that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I love that moment.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I think about, like, hooking up with a stranger, even like of the same gender, is not something that I as a woman would ever do, to like go on a road trip. So like, it's very much like I'm going all these things where, like, the money stuff where you're accidentally switching cards and stuff. I'm like, I'm so hyper aware of everything in my surroundings all the time that I just can't personally relate to it. So I'm just always going, like, when he put his wallet in the glove compartment, I'm like, oh my God, danger. Why are you doing that? You never do that.
I
like,
wouldn't do it.
It's those kinds of things that really kind of, for me, pull me out of the movie. But I think that's just because of my gender, and also because I'm me and I'm neurotic. But anyway, thank you for exposing me to the movie. I did actually enjoy a lot of it. So I think I gave it a solid B.
Okay. I'll take that.
Yeah. So
That's good.
Uncle Buck. Let's talk about Uncle Buck. It was released in August of 1989. Interestingly, this movie was, like, principal photography started at the very beginning of January 1989, and it was filmed and released that quickly, and it was on VHS by the end of the year.
Wow.
Super impressive.
It's really fast.
Yeah. As with Planes, Trains, it was written, directed, and produced by John Hughes. It is about an irresponsible bachelor who is asked to babysit his brother's kids while the brother and his wife have to suddenly go visit her father after a heart attack. Now, the brother and the wife and their kids have all just moved from wherever they used to live. And so I guess her family is still wherever they used to live. And the kids are trying to adjust at like a new school and all that kind of stuff. But apparently Uncle Buck lives in this town where they moved to. So that's the backstory. The kids are, 15-year-old Tia, 8-year-old Miles, who has Macaulay Culkin, and a 6-year-old kid named Maisie, which I just think of like Horton hatches an egg, Dr. Seuss when I hear the name Maisie, but whatever. Wackiness ensues. My history with this film is that I think I did end up usually watching this film around the holidays, even though it's not really a holiday movie. It kind of feels a little bit because it's family centric, and it kind of feels like it's cold outside in the movie, so it just kind of feels like that. I think I really love the teenage girl in the movie and really related to her. I know that most people hate her, and I feel like what really cracks me up is that when Michael and I rewatched it just last night, he was just all over it. He loves this movie. I think he's watched it more times than me. It's like one of his favorites. And he could tell me like what was going to happen because I had forgotten. It's been so long since I've watched it. And I was just like, we'll get into it after we watch your reaction, but I have a lot of personal where I relate to her in like these ways. And I don't think she's really in the wrong for like all of the mean stuff she does, because the mother in this movie is the villain. She is the worst human I've ever seen in my life. And I hate her. Every time she's on screen, I just want to like claw my eyes out. Like I literally hate her. So the teenage daughter is totally, I'm going to say before we even start this, 100% in the right for any mean thing she does, because it's all about how crappy her mom is. All right, I'm done.
Oh, wow. Okay, so with that set up, I'm now scared to show you my reaction to this movie.
Well, hey, I was scared to show you mine, so here we go.
Okay. So, this is me watching Uncle Buck. Okay, gonna watch Uncle Buck for the first time. Wow, it's a very pink title. It's a Culkin.
Thank your parents for that.
How come?
It was their brilliant idea to move here. They weren't making enough cash in Indianapolis. Forget that we were perfectly happy.
Exposition.
Shut your face.
I don't know why we need boys at all. They're so loud. Shut up! Shut up yourself!
We need boys so they can grow up, get married, and turn into shadows.
Ooh. That does not seem like a good idea.
I've had enough of your ugliness.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. We're all just a little tired of the act.
Yes.
Ooh. I don't think it's an act.
You're gonna show up for work and swear to God in the AM? Promise?
Shanice, I'll be honest with you. If I could think of an excuse that you would buy, I'd use it.
I love John Candy.
The trashy people he hangs out with? That woman who sells tires?
Selling tires? What a whore!
I love my father very much.
So why did you move away from him?
Ouch.
If my whole family moved away from me, I'd have a heart attack too.
Oh.
Yes!
Teenagers are evil.
The dog's
Yeah.
a ball sniffer.
Don't talk like that.
Oh, God.
Christ, look at the size of that house.
You have a plunger here while I'm thinking of these things.
An alarming thing to ask somebody. No, why? Why would you do that?
Unbreakable.
Oh, Jesus. She hates her mother so much, but she's turning into her, complete with headscarf.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
Are you my dad's brother?
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
I'm your dad's brother, all right.
You have much more hair on your nose than my dad.
How nice of you to notice.
I'm a kid, that's my job.
Yep, it's the 80s.
Stand me up today, and tomorrow I'll drive you to school in my robe and pajamas and walk you to your first class.
Did you ever have anyone embarrass you like this?
No.
I think he handled that quite well. Winona's school. Hey, black people exist. Oh, that's just mean.
Yeah, she's the
It's not
worst.
like he's a serial killer, for God's sake.
You ever hear of a tuna?
You ever hear of a ritual killing?
I don't get it.
The guy took off today and left Miles and Maisie alone. Plus, he drinks.
Did you brush your teeth?
You lying?
How many times a day do you feed a dog like that?
How many times a day do you think he eats?
4 or 5?
I should have told you that. He eats once. He eats once a day.
Just once.
That's evil.
What does he like to drink? The water?
Yes, he drinks water. I would keep some water out.
I've been leaving the toilet seats up. Yeah. Down with the blue one.
Cindy?
Oh, I love Laurie Metcalf.
Hello?
What is she wearing?
What is that outfit? It's amazing.
I'm gonna shove my load into you whether you like it or not. Come on!
Marcy Dahlgren Frost. Dahlgren is my maiden name. Frost is my married name. I'm single again, but I never bothered to lose the Frost. And I get compliments on the hyphen.
Sure you would, yeah.
My God.
Happy birthday!
Hell.
Super sad.
That's a pretty stupid thing to do during flu season. I bet she's getting a tongue.
Oh, come on.
I'm Anita Horgarth.
Buck melanoma. Molly Russell's ward.
Come on. Hey! Who let the cat out?
We don't have a cat.
Come on, get out. Come on, shoot. Shoot.
Well, can you tell me when he's gonna be back? He went out with Marcy, the lady who lives across the street. They usually stay out pretty late. Have a bad day today? It hurts when someone screws with your life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I have no choice. I don't care what your parents are going to say. I have to take you with me tonight.
Where?
To a racetrack.
You could ask Marcy to look after.
I'm looking for a party somewhere around here.
Oh, that's on Toto Elaine.
And my niece is there.
Ugh, our son is there.
They're kids.
The neighborhood's full of parents trying to find their kids.
Yeah.
And thus the idea for a whole movie was born.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Are you gonna tell my parents about everything that's been going on?
No,
Thanks.
I'm gonna be sorry about it. I'm just glad I got a chance to know you again.
Did you do anything to Bud?
Ugh.
Why has their relationship changed?
Mm-mm.
Don't understand.
Mm-mm. Wow, seems like you were on a real emotional roller coaster there, Conrad.
I was, yeah. I'd never seen it before. I found it absolutely hilarious. I thought John Candy has never been better. I thought Planes and Trains was one of his best performances, probably his best for me from what I'd seen. But he's just adorable in Uncle Buck with all of his rough edges. And I thought it was a really good meld because you've got a teenager in there, you've got the class comparisons, odd couple thing going on, and there's some genuinely great comedy in there. I mean, just simple gags like I've brought Who Let the Cat Out, we don't have one. just solid gold. But then it more so even than Planes and Trains, which that development that you realize that Dell is alone in the world is really sad and comes out of nowhere at the end of the movie. This one you get several moments of real introspection for Buck, and that scene with the photo album really got to me. And by the end of the movie, his relationship with Tia really did feel like it had grown, and they'd gotten to understand each other, and they were on the same level. I just did not understand the ending at all. It's like, how has she changed her perspective on her mother just because she's changed her perspective on one adult authority figure? I didn't understand that. That seemed to come from nowhere.
So my take on that, I agree with you that it's very weak. I don't agree with it like as a choice in the script. However, I think the intent is that Tia's arc, like I feel like that's one of the things about this movie is they kind of do have arcs. Buck is this adult who hasn't really grown up, and Tia is an overly mature teenager who is still stuck in a place where she's not allowed to be autonomous. And so those are their challenges. And he gets to a point where he understands like that he needs to be more responsible because his actions, kind of like we talked about in Planes, Trains, his actions affect other people in these different ways. And he's finally able to take ownership of that when he's sitting in the car with the kids. She has her arc is more where she is like understanding that adults are people. Like, do you remember when you were a teenager and you realized that your parents were people? It's weird. It's like this weird realization you have, like that they're not like these just constant authority figures, like that at one point they had their own lives and still do actually, and all of that. I think she's realizing that maybe about her mom as well. Like she learned it with Buck, but then she's applying it to her mom and maybe suddenly realized that her mom was going through a lot with her own father having just had a heart attack. And maybe she felt guilty for how crappy she'd been acting. Because I mean, I'm not saying she wasn't acting crappy. I'm just saying that like Buck screwing with her social life isn't like a great thing for him to do. Like there were it was effective to get what he wanted, but like was he really having true compassion for her as a human, or was he treating her like an inconvenience cuz she's a kid?
The funny thing with that is that he seems to be utterly preoccupied with protecting her virginity. And
Mm.
I'm not sure where
Yeah.
that comes from. It seems odd for him,
Yeah.
given who he is and what his character
I
traits are.
I agree. So my big problem with this movie, if I have one, I love this movie, but and I love John Candy, but almost every single thing he says and does reminds me of my dad,
Oh, okay.
who I have a challenging relationship with throughout, especially when I was a teenager. But like all the stuff that he did to embarrass her is exactly what my like, including the have you heard of a ritual killing? Like that is literally something my dad would have said to a boyfriend of mine.
Right.
He was very sarcastic and quippy and witty, and he was like born in the same year as these people. So like he's kind of that boomer dad, right? Like that we all
Mm.
grew up with, and he thinks it's funny, but my dad kind of did it for it from a different reason. So Buck is doing it because I think he truly wants to protect her, somewhat her virginity, but also probably just like we don't know that this guy wouldn't just kill her in the woods. Like he's kind of he doesn't seem particularly scary to me. Like I feel like his casting isn't the best. Like they could have someone who
Yeah,
looked
he
a
could
little
have been
scarier.
sleazier. Mm.
Yeah, like edgier, like Kiefer Sutherland in The Lost Boys or something like. And then it would feel more warranted, but that's not as comedic. That's literally scary. I think they
Yeah.
got the boy who could fly because they wanted to keep it a little wholesome.
God, it is the boy who could fly. I was wondering where I knew him from.
Yeah,
Wow.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, this like a lot of Hughes films, it contains out of touch, clueless parents. That's like a staple of John Hughes, right? I feel like as much as Joss Whedon hates dads, John Hughes really feels like parents just don't understand. That's kind of his thing. Like he's just in all of his movies. There was a film scholar named Alan Nadel who said that the patriarch is tantamount to dead in Hughes films. So you get a lot of commentary, not just in this film, but like even in Ferris Bueller with Cameron's dad, and you know, in Breakfast Club, we have several crappy dads. There's just a lot of parents who are just checked out and not really engaged. And I think some of that is very much a part of the Gen X experience because we were from that generation of like, we had for the first time, really generationally, moms who were like primarily working outside the home. And we were kind of left to our own devices. Parents weren't super engaged with us. Not that the previous generation's parents were that engaged with them either, but you had this ideal that you're watching on family sitcoms on TV that there's this family thing, but none of us really experienced it. So we all felt like we were missing something that I think most of us weren't getting anyway. And I think it was like the millennials that really for the first time even started approaching it, like having parents who cared about them on this deeper level. But I don't know, like to me that's what this movie is about, is you've got boomer parents, Gen X teens, and you've got millennial little kids like Macaulay Culkin and his younger sister kind of all in one place at the very beginning of like all of these conflicts between those three generations, which is kind of interesting to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I picked up, I think you noticed in the reaction that when she says that about we need boys so they can get married and turn into shadows, it's quite pointed, the commentary about dads. I notice in a lot of films around this period, there is a discourse going on in them about men being sort of subjugated or sort of disappearing as their wives become more active and more self-actualized. And I think we're still suffering from the repercussions of that culturally, that men have sort of struggled to figure out what they should do. So one of my favorite movie is Ordinary People, which comes up with the solution that the mother should just be ejected completely. So
I haven't seen that movie, and and I've been waiting to watch it because I know it's one of your favorites. So I'm like, well, we got to do something with that. But
Yeah. Yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the things that makes this film the most interesting. A lot of Hughes movies after this, from Home Alone onwards, the protagonists seem to just get younger and younger until you're on Baby's Day Out, Whereas this has all three generations, and I think the interplay between them is really interesting.
I think so too. I actually I don't like kids. I'm fairly well on record for that. But these Macaulay Culkin, like, say what you want. I loved him when he was little. I love him now. He's just hilarious to me. He's an amazing child actor, like, and you don't see that very often because kids in movies are just usually real bad. I think it's interesting, like, I noticed this, like, because I had read it, and so I was watching for it. Did you notice Anna Klumsky, who is my girl in the movie? She was sitting next to Maisie in her class.
Really? I didn't spot her. No.
Yeah, she's in there. She doesn't, I think she speaks like one or two words, but she's there and you're like, oh my God, that is her. But yeah, so just a little bit of interesting stuff about this movie. So while John Candy and John Hughes were like super close friends, let's see. I was just going to show this fun slide because I love the giant pancake. Honestly, the sentimentality of him making, because they mentioned earlier that Miles, Macaulay Culkin's character's birthday was going to happen while the parents might be gone. And she had sort of started planning a party, but she's like, oh, we'll be back by then. The fact that he makes him this giant stack of pancakes for his birthday cake is just so sweet to me. It's just, I can't even imagine someone doing that for me. It's just like, oh, I want somebody to make me a giant stack of pancakes. Anyway, the John Candy and John Hughes were really good friends. And, but apparently they got into a disagreement while they were filming this movie. So one night, John Candy went to a bar in Chicago and stayed out all night drinking and meeting fans and all this kind of stuff. And then the next morning, Hughes was driving to set for the film and he heard about that on like a little local radio station, and that he had just left the bar a short time before that. And so when he showed up on set, John Hughes was like, no, you're not going to work today because I don't want you drunk or having recently been drinking while you're on set. And he's like, well, it works because my character is kind of supposed to be this disheveled kind of guy. And he's like, nope, we're not doing that. And apparently that was a thing. I know, John Candy liked to smoke and drink and do that kind of stuff. Like, no shade toward him, but Ron Howard apparently has a similar story when they were doing Splash, that he had been out all night with Jack Nicholson at a bar, and the next day they had that racquetball scene in Splash that they had to film. So I guess it's just sort of a thing, but it's kind of a fun little behind the scenes story. Yeah. So this was one of those things, like, I don't know that we really touched on this, but John Hughes is sort of notorious for like getting into deals with studios, but then backing out of them. Like, he didn't really like the studios and trust the studio system, which I think it's that nonconformist in him. He actually moved, like you mentioned, when he was like 13 to a new city. And so I think a lot of like the stuff with Tia is coming from a place of his own experience, by the way. Like, that's why it feels so real. But anyway, about a year after Uncle Buck, he tried to get out of the contract that he had made, because he had made a multi-picture deal with Universal for this movie. And but a lot of people consider this the first of a line of films in his career that really underperformed. Danny DeVito was an early alternate casting choice for this thing, but honestly, I think this was written for John Candy. Like, but I think if John Candy hadn't been available, he was considered. And I do like the idea of like, what would this movie have been like had that not actually come to pass?
Yeah, I can't imagine Danny DeVito doing that.
I can't either. I can't. So the guy who plays the clown, there's a clown that was hired by the mom for Macaulay Culkin's birthday, and some of this got cut out, much like Planes, Trains. There's a longer cut of this movie. Most of the scenes are not, and like Universal just kind of doesn't do anything with this movie, so they haven't ever been released. But in the scripts, you can kind of see that those are, things that would have happened. So anyway, this clown guy was hired. There was more to this whole scene with him, but he shows up at the door. John Candy can tell he's been drinking, which is ironic based on what I just told you. The guy who was playing the clown, though, was very freaked out because this was filmed truly in the suburbs of Chicago. And for any of you who don't know, Chicago is where John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer, the killer clown, is from. And so even though it was quite a few years before, so maybe 10 years before when he was arrested, you know, he was convicted for killing like at least 33 young men, and having them in his basement between like 1967 and 1978. It's just sort of walking around in a clown costume in the suburbs made him feel very awkward. So in Chicago. But anyway, there was a whole fight scene apparently that happened, like a big fight scene that happened in the front yard where they're just punching the crap out of each other. And that apparently won a lot of favor for Macaulay Culkin's character, who in the original script had a much bigger story arc where he wasn't making friends at school, but this whole scenario made him popular because all the boys who showed up at his party were like, "Oh my God, you should have been at his house. His uncle beat the crap out of a clown." Like, which is hilarious.
I do.
This
like
high
that
school,
scene.
this high school, New Trier West High School in Illinois, was used in Ferris Bueller, Home Alone, and 16 Candles. But it was not a functioning high school when this was filmed, but used in a lot of stuff. I did want to point out that the guy that we talked about, Jay Underwood, who played the boy who could fly, he was also in the 1994 Fantastic Four as Johnny Storm, the unreleased, you know. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's actually quite good, in my opinion. The Roger Corman one.
Yeah. That they made just to keep hold of the rights. It was a contractual thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, he's now a pastor, but he's still making movies. He made a very low budget movie just a couple years ago about, it said it was a gay superhero and a vampire team up to fight crime or something. I was like,
okay,
that sounds interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And then just as a couple little fun side notes, they've tried to make Uncle Buck into a TV show twice. This one was from 1990, starring Kevin Meaney, and it was also just called Uncle Buck. And it aired for didn't even air a full season. There were 16 episodes aired, and then they yanked it because it was not doing great. Apparently, the pilot caused a minor controversy because the little girl who plays Maisie, the little blonde girl there, she yells out to Uncle Buck, "You suck." And that was the first time that was ever said on TV. And it was like, oh, scandal.
Really?
Yeah. To your point about how if you try to put these things on TV, they're going to be so watered down that all of the meaty parts, the good stuff, is going to get cut out necessarily.
Yeah. It needs to be HBO or Netflix or something now, doesn't it? You can't do it on one of the main networks.
Yeah. And then in 2016 there was a second attempt. I watched about half of an episode of this version. It also got canceled after a season, but it was much more watchable. At least they were bringing some new spin to the show. Like in this season, or in this show, the parents die. And so he has to come in and actually take custody of the kids, which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's a completely different vibe.
Yeah, right. And then my favorite is there is an Indian version from 1991 that's called Uncle Bun, which actually looks really good. And there's a 4K of it remastered. I kind of want to check it out. It looks very fun. That's the teenage daughter there on the screen. So
yeah, looking suitably horrified.
Right? Yeah. And it's got some slapstick to it, and it's got some great, hopefully music stuff in it, because, it's just, it's great. It looks great. So, yeah, as we're winding down and looking at, John Hughes' legacy overall, it kind of seems like John Hughes really loved to focus on the suburban family as a site of conflict. And I'm going to take us back to when we did our retrospective on the Halloween film franchise.
Mm.
Kind of the same thing where it's like we've all had white flight, left the cities. We've got suburbs. They're supposed to be safe from scary things. In the 70s, it was like horror films are coming in and showing all this kind of stuff. For John Hughes, it's more like the parents' neglect and all this kind of stuff is fracturing the family. But it's always risk to the family. It's like some kind of problem, but it's framed very comedically. But the family is at this, it's very white, middle class, like you said, very insulated group of people that this is talking about it's not a nice cross section of all people, right? It's also very American. So I wonder from your perspective, like how much this translates. I know England in some ways isn't super different from America in some of those things in the 80s, but like, did you kind of go, is this very, very, very American, or was it relatable to you back then?
The teen stuff certainly was. I mean, all of those teen movies were just as popular here as I think they were there. I think it spoke to universal experiences of teenage life, wanting to be autonomous and the sort of things that worried you about your reputation and your position within society at school, and just your complete bafflement at what the future might hold for you outside of it. In terms of the suburban family life, it looked very aspirational, certainly to me, because my family was very much working class. So you see all these massive homes, like the house in Home Alone just looks cavernous. Unreal. Yeah.
And back then, like houses like that now are not as difficult to get, like for more middle class people, I guess is what I'm saying. But back then you were like upper crusty if you had a house like that. Like you were really doing well. Like you were making 200,000 in the 80s. Like that's insane to have a house that big with those banisters and all that.
Yeah. Okay. So I wasn't totally alienated then. It was just as strange from your perspective.
Yeah, well, because I'm military, so we were also pretty working class, like middle class, but probably lower middle class. Like we weren't struggling to find food, but we weren't living in a house like that, like not even close.
No, me neither. Also military, so yeah, no way. So, but I think he confronted that a few times. Like Class comes into Some Kind of Wonderful, which is my personal favorite of his teen movies. There's very much there's a class structure, which is the sort of thing you would see more of, I think, in things like Clueless in the 90s rather than the 80s. But yeah, that came up in Some Kind of Wonderful and Pretty in Pink.
Yeah, I kind of remember it in Pretty in Pink, although I've seen 16 Candles more often than Pretty in Pink. I don't know why that is. I think it must have just come on TBS more. Yeah.
Well, Pretty in Pink and Some Kind of Wonderful are basically the same movie, but with the genders of the main characters reversed. And on Some Kind of Wonderful, I think John Hughes got the ending that he wanted, whereas the ending for Pretty in Pink was studio enforced, I think, and he fell out with the studio as a result of that particular.
I do want to point something. I know we're not talking about those movies, but I think this is a thing that John Hughes kind of does. John Hughes loves to get inside the head of whoever it is, whether it's a teenager or a jock or the prom queen or the weird girl or Uncle Buck or whoever, right? Like he likes to try to feel like he's really speaking in their voice and understanding them. I don't always think he hits it, but I can see that he at least cares about it. But is it 16 Candles or Pretty in Pink I think it's 16 Candles where there's the jock that she likes, but he's like, I want a girlfriend that like I really care about. Like I'm not just trying to get laid. And he like tries to make the jock not be the jock stereotype. He's doing these things, and he does it a lot in The Breakfast Club too, where he's like, and it reminds me of Buffy in that episode called Earshot, where Jonathan climbs up to the top of the tower and he's going to kill himself, but she thinks he's going up there to like shoot like a mass shooter situation and kill a bunch of people. And she has this whole dialogue with him at the end of the episode where she's like, everyone down there, they don't feel your pain, they don't see your pain because they're already in their own pain. And she knows that because she's spent the whole episode hearing everyone's thoughts because of this demon exposure she had. And I agree with where they're going with that, but I kind of feel like both of these things are saying the same message, which I don't always agree with. Some people just genuinely suck. Some people just genuinely don't care about your suffering and have never been through anything bad enough to have any real empathy. Like, they've just never been through any trauma, so they can't even understand like why anyone would ever be suicidal or depressed or sad on that deeper level. And so they're kind of very surface people. I'm not saying they don't have their own struggles. Everybody has their own struggles, but some people struggle up here and some people like really have to deal with stuff. And most of the characters in these movies aren't dealing with like serious trauma, deep stuff. Like, it's kind of just normal teen stuff. And so those people having empathy seems a little less likely to me. I guess maybe that's my own bias, but what do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. I think he plays within a certain range, and it's just it's just, a few feet at the shallow end. I don't think he gets into the deep end.
Yeah,
But
I like deep
but
end.
working within that, yeah, me too. But I think when he's working within that range, he does study the nuances and how big it feels to you as a teenager, because you have no perspective whatsoever and all the hormones in the world. So everything seems to be super important when, it's not really, but it feels like it.
Or it is really, like, because some teenagers are going through really major
Yeah, but not
stuff.
in his movies.
Not in his movies. You're right.
No.
But like,
Yeah.
I went through a lot of serious stuff as a teenager, so I always bristle at that whole, going back to our first episode with Degrassi, I always bristle at the whole like, well, it's like teenagers have to go through stuff that you never have to go through again in your whole life. And it's really hard and you don't have any control over anything. Like, that's to me the most terrifying thing, is not having control. So yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
So let's look at some, you pulled some data for us, Conrad, about John Hughes movies. So let's look and see what the world thought of John Hughes.
Yeah, so just to have a look at his overall career. So this is his films by Rotten Tomato critics ratings, and this is just the top end. So according to critics, National Lampoon's Vacation is sort of the most critically acclaimed of his films. He wrote it, he didn't direct it. The top film that he directed as well is Planes, Trains and Automobiles, critically, which I think is interesting because I think it's grown in terms of its critical appreciation. I think it possibly didn't land that way at the time, and it has subsequently become a much more appreciated film since John Candy's passing. And then you've got The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and 16 Candles, Mr. Mom, Some Kind of Wonderful, Pretty in Pink, and Christmas Vacation, which I've always liked as well, and Home Alone, dawdling around the middle there. It's not very popular
That's
at all.
shocking to me. I guess maybe not, but it is a little.
Yeah, a little.
I love it. I unabashedly love Home Alone.
Yeah.
It makes me cry every time.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't? You're kind of on the fence about it?
Yeah, I don't mind it. It's fine. If it's on, I won't scream and run out of the room, but it's not something I count as a favorite. It didn't resonate with me, but it's interesting to see that it doesn't score well among critics for sure. But then when it comes to audiences, it's The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, of course. They're the ones that everybody remembers, and I think they've become kind of totemic for a generation in terms of The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller just capturing their memories of that period.
I really dislike both of them. I do. Like, I feel like it's sort of the teen experience if you were a muggle.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like,
Okay.
for lack of a better word, like if you were sort of just, you know, normal. I don't know.
Yeah.
Those are the people who would have treated me like crap in high school for sure. Like Ferris Bueller and like all those kids. Like, and then the one girl in the Breakfast Club that I did identify with, they totally screwed that up. So I'm just kind of like, I don't like that.
You didn't like her getting a makeover?
It feels new cringe. It really does. Like, I also feel like I would have been like Tia level of evil, but to all of those kids in detention. And it would have made for, like, I strongly identify with Wednesday Addams and Darlene from Roseanne. So those are like my two spirit animal characters. So I feel like, you know, that's how I would have been acting. I would have just been like, don't look at me or I'll stab you in the throat. Like, that's the kind of stuff I would say to people in high school. Well, I wonder why I didn't have friends.
It's curious. I can't put
I know.
a finger on it.
Anyway.
But in terms of box office, inflation adjusted, well, even with inflation adjusted, Home Alone is through the roof. By far and away his most successful movie. So $671 million is, it's a lot. That's just domestic. Home Alone 2, 101 Dalmatians, because he went through this period of doing Disney movies.
Yeah, like Flubber was another one, right? Oh, there it is. Yeah, down there. Yep.
It is. Yeah. Mr. Mom, apparently.
Mr. Mom is really good. It's very solid. It's a very watchable movie, and I just love Michael Keaton. Like, you forget how much you love him, and then you start watching. If you like him, that movie is better than you remember, or that I remember it being. Like, and I don't even like kids.
I've never seen it. I've never ever seen it.
It's apparently much like She's Having a Baby. She's Having a Baby is literally almost like an autobiographical story of John Hughes. Like, and his wife, and he got her pregnant because you remember they were high school sweethearts, and her dad talking about him being a writer and how much that was a dumb thing to do, and why did you have to screw up my daughter's life, and all of that stuff, and all the stuff in Mr. Mom where he was having to take care of their two kids while his wife was working and he's trying to be, you know, whatever. All of that is him sort of remembering what that time in his own life was. So
that explains why he fell out with Paramount over She's Having a Baby, because as I alluded to earlier, that film came out in 88, but he actually wrapped it in 86. But Paramount was so determined to get him to direct and finish Planes, Trains and Automobiles because there was an impending director's strike in mid-1987. Right. So they shelved his film. Yeah, imagine that. No, they shelved his film, and if, as you're saying, it was a very personal film, it explains why he fell out with and subsequently stopped working with that studio. But he seems like quite a fickle guy anyway. All of the accounts that I've read of him, people would be like his best friend for years, like 2 or 3 years. Like James Spader said this. And then all of a sudden he called him one day and his number had changed, and that was it. He never spoke to him again before his death. He just vanished. Never told him why. So he has no idea what he did wrong. Same for the editor, Paul Hirsch. He thinks maybe he was too assertive when they were editing Planes, Trains, but he never spoke to him again. They never worked again. Yeah, no explanation. He was just gone. So that's the way he lived his life.
Wow. Did not know that one.
No.
Well, I have some John Candy movie stats here. These are sorted by domestic gross. So we've got, and that BO rank by year is not body odor. It is box office rank by year. So Home Alone, as you said, this is from a different website, Ultimate Movie Rankings, but still pretty close, adjusted domestic in the millions. So it's 618 million. It's pretty close, right? It's going to vary. But, and then you've got, you know, the top 3 movies he did were Home Alone, Stripes, and the Blues Brothers, which I found to be surprising. His top critical rated on Rotten Tomatoes are Splash, National Lampoon's Vacation from 1983, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Right.
And the audience score top three are the Blues Brothers, JFK, which in JFK he has a tiny part, I believe, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So Planes, Trains really does well with both the critics and the audience overall, like pretty high. If you look at something like Uncle Buck, you've got the critics giving it a 62% and the audience giving it a 77%. Which frankly shocks me. Like, I find it to be personally much more relatable and heartwarming than like Planes, Trains, but it's probably because I find both of the characters kind of not likable. And I mean, I feel like they could have either skewed one like so that one was really likable, but then by the end you like them both, or you like the different one or something. I don't know, but there's just something, maybe it's just the slapstick puts me off. I think that's probably a big part of it. But
it's interesting to see though that Uncle Buck is, am I right in thinking that is the only film where he has the lead role and it's the most successful one? Or it's the most successful of his films where he is in the lead role. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you could count it, but like I think in Cool Runnings he has a pretty big role. I don't know if he's considered like the main character, but and in The Great Outdoors, he's also one of the main characters, right? I've never seen it, but I'm pretty sure it's him and Dan Aykroyd and is it Chevy Chase? They're all like, I don't remember because it's not a movie I have any desire to watch, but
this is Home Alone, Stripes, Blues Brothers, Splash, and National Lampoon's Vacation. I think he's a supporting player. So
That's right.
Uncle Buck, I think, is the most successful of his lead roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then this is just sort of going to show you exactly the same information visually. And that giant bar you see on the far left is Home Alone's domestic gross, right? It's huge. And then those other two are just like the ratings, but yeah. So I think what we walk away with is like, I have both more appreciation for both these guys, and yet I still feel even more firm in some of my initial take on both of them as well.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same, although having written off everything he did after Planes and Trains and Automobiles, I'm delighted to find Uncle Buck because I'd never seen it and I just assumed that it was, silly, goofy comedy with nothing really substantial to it. But it's not. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm going to be interested. So this Thanksgiving, since you don't do Thanksgiving, I'm going to find a way for the two of us. I don't know how we'll manage this, but I'm going to find a way for the two of us to watch Dutch together. Because if you like road movies, it's hard to find. Like, you actually have to buy it. Like, I don't think it's on any streaming services. Kind of like an abandoned film. But I have a copy of it, of course. And I would love to see your reaction to that because it's kind of got a lot of elements that I think work for you.
Okay. Interesting.
All right. I'm going to read some super chats now, if that's okay.
Go for it.
All right, so first up we have Wildstar Studio. Thank you so much. He says Taco Bell is where Mexican food goes to die. And where you go to die if you want to eat bad Mexican food. So here's the biggest revelation for me. Zantara is Jasmine.
Ah, okay.
So of course, Zantara, I know who you are. Of course I do. I just didn't realize that Jasmine equals Zantara. So my apologies for that. It's probably just me being dim, but that's awesome. And thank you so much. Obviously, you're not a new patron. You've been a very long time supporter of our channel. So you're awesome. Chalor? Not sure how to say that, but he says Some Kind of Wonderful is so underrated. Most don't even remember it.
Yeah.
Dare I say I've never seen it?
See, I love that movie. It's Eric Stoltz and Mary Stuart Masterson and Leah Thompson and Elias Koteas and Craig Sheffer. Yeah, great soundtrack. really heartwarming story, and it's got the right ending rather than the wrong ending. Yeah, I love that movie. So I was in full agreement with Chalor or Calor.
Yes. Yeah. Zentara again, she says, thank you for the shout out. Glad I guessed it right and could be here live. Not a new patron, lol. Yes, very, very true. Wicked Person says, oddly, I know Susan Isaacs, the actress who shoots scenes as John Candy's wife, acting with him, but getting her part cut down to her still in the photo he carries. Disappointing for her, but pleased to have worked with Candy. So that's true. So we didn't get to me saying this, but apparently in those extended scenes, there was a whole thing about how she thought he was cheating on her. And that's like the wife in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Every time he's calling her on the phone while they're on the road, she's like asking him about Dell. And I don't know if he's not getting that she's thinking he's cheating, but she's upset. She's been really worried. And all these scenes of her laying in bed pensively are about that, but they cut all of that out. So you just are like, why? And then why is she just there? And then why is she crying at the end? It's very weird. It makes it feel unmotivated when it's not unmotivated.
Yeah, and you said, wouldn't it be weird to be the actress that gets this part? And it's a pretty thankless one. It's like all these disaster movies where somebody's climbing Everest and some Oscar-winning actress gets the role of being the person that sits by the phone looking worried for brief cutaways. It's like, oh, that's a great role. Enjoy that. So apparently another actress had a role as Del Griffith's wife, presumably for flashbacks.
Oh, is it the lady in the photo? Oh, this the lady in the photo that he's saying. Okay.
Yeah. So yet another role completely gone. Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah. So like all the cutscenes aren't in that new 4K release, but some of like a bit of them are.
About an hour.
Wow. Okay. She had very 80s hair in that photo. Like it was very 80s, but still much prettier than like the poor mom in Uncle Buck. Boy, she has the worst hairstyle I've ever seen on a human. Like that is unfortunate. Wow. And it matches her horrendous personality. She's like, I don't want a poor in my house. She's just the worst. Jason Anderson says the 80s had its addiction to fart jokes, phlegm jokes, burp jokes, pretty much the era of the bodily function humor. Yeah, that's true. Brandon R says Judd Nelson's character in Breakfast Club was physically abused. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying none of these characters have any real issues, but I guess he was he and Ali Sheedy's character Allison were the two most, in my opinion, relatable. Maybe the nerd character, but like the jock and the preppy girl, I just couldn't get past. Like, I know they have their own problems, but like,
check your privilege.
I can't handle it. Zantara says, wonderful show. I highly recommend Reach the Rock, 1998, written by Hughes, if you all haven't seen it. Wow, I've never heard of that. I'll have to check it out. I will have to check that out. The Night Badger says, Mr. Mom rests a lot on Keaton's charm. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Very big back in the day. Themes are dated, but still holds up. Yeah. Michael Keaton is just, to me, he's really cute.
It's so funny because I remember there was a huge outcry about his casting as Batman for the Tim Burton movie because he was seen as comedy guy. But for me personally in the UK, I'd never seen him in anything prior
Oh, really?
to Batman. Yeah.
Not even, when was Beetlejuice? Was that the 90s?
No, Beetlejuice was before, but I don't think I'd seen it. I'm not sure it was a massive hit here.
Okay. You know, my stepdad is in Beetlejuice.
Really?
Yeah. He's one of the guys moving furniture into the house when the weird people move in. Yeah, they shot it. They filmed it in Vermont. And he's from Vermont, or he lived in Vermont at the time anyway. And so they had this thing where they're like, do you want to be an extra, like in the newspaper? So he showed up and they ended up using him, putting him in the white jumpsuit, and they're carrying that weird couch into the
Yeah.
house. So that's my stepdad.
Wow, I'll check that out. There's a sequel coming soon. Maybe he can appear in that too.
I sent him a link to that. Yeah. Jace Anderson says, I always felt a lot of the 80s was about mainstreaming everything and everyone, bringing the fringe to the center and making it conform. See, I always felt like the 80s was about keeping all of the fringe way the heck over there and not letting them have access to anything. Like there were the cool kids at school, and by cool I don't mean cool. I mean like preppy, yuppie kids, the rich kids, and then there was like everybody else. So, you were just not, if you weren't acceptable and willing to conform, you had no access. And what that meant later was you didn't get into frats and sororities, and then later that means you don't do well in your career. And no one told you that until you were like 30 and you were like, whoops, I made some bad life choices. But that's a whole different story for another day. That does wrap up this particular episode of Dreamland. You can find our show notes with links to all of our sources on retroblasting.com/Dreamland. We're going to be back is it next month? Yes, October. Can you believe it's already October, Conrad?
Yes.
We're going to be back in October with our next show. Conrad, what is our title for next time? And can we see our clue slide for everyone to guess?
We can, yes. So the word that you all need to be thinking about and guessing about is hostess. Hostess. Yeah. What could that be about?
I wonder if I'll wear a Halloween costume for the show. Maybe we make it a Halloween costume situation.
Maybe we should, yeah.
Maybe we should. I think it might be fun. And then all of you can show up in costume as well. You can tell us in the chat what you're dressed up as.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, well, until then, you can follow me and Conrad on Retroblasting and Movie Oubliette, respectively, on all social media outlets. And you can email us at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.